Hi students, this is Ms. Galt. I'm one of the teachers for Intermediate Algebra. If you remember, when we last saw you, we were preparing to take the Chapter 9 test. Obviously, we can't do a test over the phone, so what we're doing instead is you are going to do a project to finish out the Chapter 9 and to prove that you know how to solve quadratic equations. So your goal with this project is to convince us that you know how to solve quadratic equations using the methods we taught you this chapter in Chapter 9. This will be a summative assignment. This will be worth 50 points, and it will be due on April 6th at 5 p.m. April 6th is a Monday. That's 5 p.m. Central Time. So make sure that you have your project ready to go at that time and turned into Schoology. There will be a link in the Chapter 9 folder for you to turn in your assessment. There's a document that I'd like you to take a look at, and the document is on Schoology for today, so I hope you have that open. As you're taking a look at that document, there are really three big questions I want you to ask yourself as you're preparing for your project. One big question that I want you to ask yourself, which might not be your first question, but is definitely one of the questions. One big question I want to ask you to ask yourself is, how will you present the project? One of the items on the rubric is creativity. So how will you show your creativity when you present the project? You may use a screen recording. You may it doesn't fit in my bubble. So you're asking yourself, how will you present the project creatively? You can use a Google form. A Google Doc. You can record yourself on your phone and upload a video. You can figure out you could make a poster and present the poster creatively. How are you going to present this information to me? So that's one of the questions I want you to ask yourself. I don't necessarily want you to ask that first, but I do want you to be thinking about how will you creatively present your project. Okay? We're giving you some flexibility with the presentation. We want you to find a way to present your material in a way that makes sense to you. The second thing is you will be given 4 equations, and so really I want you to be asking yourself, which method will you use for each of the 4 equations? There are 4 methods and 4 equations. You're only allowed to use each method once. Some of the methods work for all of the equations. Some of the methods work for only some of the equations. So you have to decide which method you're going to use for each of the 4 equations. There are multiple correct answers to this question, but there are also some wrong answers to this question because you need to be able to solve each of the equations using each of our 4 methods. The 4 methods we have are graphing, factoring, completing the square, and the quadratic formula. So you need to use each of those 4 methods once in solving each of your 4 equations. The third question that I want you to be thinking about is how will my project prove that I know what I'm doing? So I want this to be a guiding question as you're working. How will this project be proving that I know how to solve quadratic equations? If the project doesn't prove that to us, then we can't give you you can't earn the 50 points you need for this project. So your goal will be to prove that you know how to solve a quadratic and you know which method to use for the 4 types of equations that you have. So these will be your 4 equations. Those are the 4 methods. They don't necessarily line up. I'm not saying this is the one you will solve with graphing, and this is the one you'll solve with factoring, and this is the one you'll complete the square for, and this is the one you'll use a quadratic formula. That's one of the challenges. You have to decide which of these 4 methods will I use for each of these 4 equations. I need to make sure that I'm using each of the 4 methods and solving each of the 4 equations. As you're mapping out your time, I want you to think about how you're going to get this project done. So here are the things that I would recommend that you do. Today is Monday. I definitely recommend that you watch this video. I would also recommend that you start solving those quadratics. Try all 4 quadratics. Try each of the methods. See which methods work best for which quadratics. You need to have one of each method, so go for it. Try solving each of these quadratics. Try solving this with graphing. Try solving it with factoring. Try solving it with completing the square. Try solving it with the quadratic formula. And then do that for each of your 4 equations. So that's what I would do on Monday. Right now it's just paper and pencil. Try solving those quadratics. And when I say pencil, graphing, of course, you're going to be using a calculator or the online version of the calculator. So you are showing that you know how to use that calculator tool to solve a quadratic. On Tuesday, I would make your final decisions. So I would start making decisions about which method to use. For each equation. So knowing that you have to use each of the methods, knowing that you have to solve all 4 equations, which one will you use for which equation? So that's definitely something I would decide by Tuesday. I would also start thinking about how you will present the project. Okay. On Wednesday, that's when I would for sure start building the project. If that means you're making a poster, if that means that you're drawing a cartoon, if that means that you are making an online cartoon, if that means that you are, whatever it means you're doing for your project, Wednesday's the day to start building. You're going to continue to build your project in your spare time between Wednesday and when it's due. It's due at 5:00 p.m. on Monday. Again, that's Monday, April 6th, when it's due. So today you're watching the video, you're starting to solve the quadratics. Tomorrow you're going to decide which method to use with which quadratic. You're going to decide how you will present the project. Wednesday, you're going to start building your project, and you're going to continue that process until you're done, and it's due at 5 p.m. on Monday. Okay. The important thing to think about with this project is I want you to think about how it's graded, and I want you to think about how what you're doing is proving each of those things. So one of the ways it's graded is on graphing. Were you able to prove that you definitely know how to solve a quadratic on your graphing calculator? Were you able to show that in your project? Okay. Were you able to show that you know how to solve a quadratic equation with factoring? Is your project proof that you definitely know that technique? Can you prove that you know how to complete the square to solve a quadratic equation? And can you prove that you know how to use the quadratic formula effectively to solve a quadratic equation? So those are 4 of the items on your rubric. The other 2 items on the rubric are, can you justify which method you used? So make sure that you're also justifying. I chose to use graphing for this quadratic because it looked like a hard one to factor. I couldn't figure out how to complete the square, and graphing is something I know I can do on my own. So whatever your justification is, make sure you have a justification for each of your methods. And then finally, did you show off your creativity a little bit? So You will also be graded based on how creative your project is. Make sure that you're demonstrating creativity with your final result. I hope this is a fun way to prove that you know how to solve a quadratic equation. I hope you have fun with it and are creative, and I can't wait to see what you make. Thank you so much. Bye.